Hi everyone. So this is Himanshu Sehgal, CEO Pharma Shots. We are yet again with another video of the pre-conference interview where we are with Mike Ryan, who is working with Eversana. This interview is going to be a glimpse into what Mike is going to contribute at Reuters Pharma 2025, which is happening in Barcelona next week. So Mike is going to be speaking there, and he's going to be part of a discussion. So Mike has spared out his time from his busy schedule, and he want to talk to us. What are his viewpoints? So yeah. Without further ado, hi Mike. Thank you so much for taking out time. It is lovely interacting with you, and I think let's start.
Hey, Himanshu, it's lovely meeting you too, and always a pleasure to help prepare for the conference in Barcelona. We have a long and enjoyable history with the conference, and very much looking forward to it.
Awesome. So, Mike, would you be kind enough to walk us through about, first introduce about Eversana? What is Eversana? What is the company all about? A little bit, maybe a small bit of a history of the company,
Sure.
and yeah, from there we will take it forward.
Yeah, well, Eversana is a company that is both old and new, I guess, really is the best way to describe it, Himanshu. As an entity in of itself, it's about 7 years old, but it really was formed through the vision of our CEO and his colleagues to look at the idea that industry has grown remarkably in the last number of years on the back of innovation in industry itself, and the idea that there are outsourcing partners out there that can help reduce the burden in terms of the amount of resource that's required in-house in an organization. That's true in the contract manufacturing side of things. It's true in the clinical research side of things. But we noticed that there was a gap in that sort of idea of a consolidated commercialization or contract commercialization offering. And we set about acquiring best-in-class organizations and bringing them together. And bringing them together, I suppose, between two electronic platforms. One is a platform that links all of the services together. And the other then is sort of a platform that understands the wealth of health information that's out there and can bring that to bear in order to make a sort of better launch, better classes of launch, and to be able to respond better to environmental forces that are out there that will affect launch. So that journey started 7 years ago with Jim and has ultimately gotten us to a situation where we're serving well in advance of 600 clients. In fact, more than 670 clients. We have 7,000 employees dotted all over the world. And we have brought about, I think, a lot of new ways for clients to look at commercializing their product, not just sort of giving it piecemeal out to a whole series of small individuals or smaller companies or whatever, but really looking at a sort of a consolidated offering. And that in of itself then has really helped solve for a lot of problems in terms of how a commercialization can respond to the ever-changing environment that we're seeing out there, and I know we'll talk about later on, how technology can be leveraged to a much greater extent to harmonize and improve launch, and in reality try and bring about more efficient launches so that companies can concentrate more on bringing more products to market, which is really ultimately our goal. Our goal is really to drive accessibility of drugs for patients all over the world, and I think we're well in our journey towards that.
Okay, so you mentioned about number of employees and all. So how big? Because you are based out of Ireland, Cork. So how big is the Europe team in for Eversana?
Well,
Or how big is Eversana in Europe? Sorry. So my two parts question: how big is the team, and how big is Eversana in Europe in terms of client and everything?
Well, so let's start with the sort of the number of people that we have. So we've well in excess of 400 people now in Europe, and we've got that dotted across about 14 countries, where we have offices then in London, in Berlin, in Finland, and 2 offices in Italy, and then employees in other countries right across the continent. But I suppose equally, it's important to remember that just because somebody isn't based in Europe, they can't support European launches. So we have a significant team based out in India that's helping us develop a lot of the technology that we use to support our European clients and indeed to support European launches. And we have teams as well that, whilst they're not physically based in Europe, they have significant experience in doing things like value and evidence submissions and preparations of dossiers and so on. So I would say, in terms of our ability to support Europe, we have a comprehensive offering that's staffed by people that have experience in launch in Europe, some of whom are geographically based in Europe and some of whom are geographically based elsewhere, but again, have spent most of their career working on and understanding the European marketplace.
Awesome. Also, you just mentioned about a platform.
Yeah.
So what kind of a platform it is, how it helps pharma companies or healthcare companies?
Well, the platform, as I said, there's 2 elements to how the platform works, I suppose, and I always see it as a kind of a sandwich of the actual services themselves. The first part is a platform, a sort of almost a project management platform, an information platform that links together the disparate services that were required for an appropriate launch. So, for example, we have a medical information team. They're the ones that ingest information from patients. When a patient looks at a package insert, there's a number to call often if they have a query about the drug. We provide that service in local language across Europe for patients and indeed, obviously, for the drug companies that are sponsoring or own the drug. Linking and the ability to link the feedback that we're getting for those, obviously within the confines of GDPR and all of the confidentiality, but being able to link that back then to, what agency are putting out in terms of the messaging about the drug and understanding that there's certain amount of patient feedback that ultimately can feed into how agency are designing their ongoing sort of medcoms or the design of the advertising or the placement that they're doing for the product and everything else in between. So we can get feedback almost, as it were, from patients and HCPs, whether it's medical information, whether it's our contract field sales force that's out there, MSLs, and that can be easily then translated into information for the ad agency that we have, as I said, to hone and refine their message and do so in a much more agile, much faster sort of way than the traditional model where you had various, as I said, different organizations trying to handle and pass information back and forth from one another and so on. That's all in a single platform for our team, making that sort of information transfer better. On the other side then of the sandwich, as it were, we have a comprehensive data analytics offering where we can ingest information from the global information database, as it were, what's out there, what HCPs are saying on LinkedIn, what is being said in medical and scientific papers, what insurance codes are being claimed in any particular different geography. And we can marry all of those things together to ensure that we know the sort of the mindset of HCPs or doctors out there, and that can drive our sort of approach so that we make sure that the message we're trying to get across to them is crafted in a way that it's succinct, it meets their needs, it can almost anticipate to some extent the issues that they're facing, and we can determine, how well our clients' products can address those issues for them. That, to me, again, coupled with using that and that ability to understand, the requirements for and that healthcare professionals need right now, then again, that will help design a much better overall sales approach. And again, in Europe, you can marry that in then with the sort of the cultural requirements of each individual country. We know that, for example, the Nordic countries have been very much to the fore in the utilization of devices for their information requirements. So we can take a more non-personal approach up there, whereas we know other parts of Europe, maybe in the south, are still very much in favor of the idea of personal sort of contact with medical scientific liaisons or field sales team and so on. And again, we can, together with our client and being able to have access to all of these different levers, design a sales structure and a commercial structure in Europe that really meets the needs of the client, of the patient, of the HCP, wherever they are in Europe, and indeed within the cultural bounds of what serves them best. So it really is that ability to harness information on both sides to make the overall experience of the patient, of the HCP, of patients' families as good as it can be.
Awesome. So because you spoke about pharma products getting into European market, so
Yeah.
how difficult or how easy it is for, let's just take an hypothetical situation where a US-based very small mid-size, a small or a mid-size company wants to launch or introduce the product in
Yeah.
European market.
Yeah.
They don't have they're just planning for it basically. So
Mhm.
how difficult and what are the challenges they are going to face? I know, I mean, there can be enormous, but if you can name a couple of them, what they are going to face while entering into the new European market would be great.
Well, the first problem they often face is perception. They often face and believe that and think that the perception of the European market is that it's very, very complex. And to an extent, I suppose they're correct in some regards. It's certainly more complex than the United States market in some respects. Okay.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's a market of 450 million people. It's a market that has an excellent regulatory infrastructure through the European Medicines Agency. It's a market where the genetic makeup of the population is very similar to that of the United States, and of course, much of the clinical data that will have been used to get regulatory approval both in Europe and the US will have come from Europe. And of course, there is generally a very strong correlation between the European Medicines Agency and the FDA in terms of what they approve and what they're looking for. So to get regulatory approval for Europe now, particularly again under I think the excellent direction of the European Medicines Agency and by extension the European Union over the last 20 years, has become so much more straightforward. Where the difficulties, I suppose, arise for them in the first instance is at present in Europe, each country still is independent in terms of its strategy for pricing. So each country has its own health technology assessment group. They often require very different things that are often not captured in the clinical trial data and need to be somehow revisited, whether by doing some additional clinical work or by doing sort of more bench or library-based work in order to get those data. Consequence of that, where I come back to my point about perception, is it's generally felt, look, it's probably easier for us to out-license the product to suppliers than it is for us to do it ourselves. They're also obviously concerned about making sure they don't take their eye off the ball on the US market, which generally tends to be the biggest market that they have. And I think historically speaking, they might have had a point. But I think companies like ourselves are now at the forefront of saying, look, we actually have created the individual country infrastructure that you do not now need to recreate. You can use that infrastructure combined with a small infrastructural investment of your own to become a European commercial powerhouse, and sometimes in some cases. So we can provide them with all of the infrastructure that they need in terms of hiring sales teams, local knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Most importantly, I suppose, at the very early stages of all of this, what we can do is provide them with, outstanding guidance in their pricing strategy. And I say pricing strategy very specifically. Pricing strategy and market access strategy, I think, are hand in glove, but there is a difference. I think the idea of understanding what is the target sort of price in order to be economically viable, even with the model like ours, which requires a lower level of capital investment. What is the ask from the cost of perspective of the drug and the target cost of the drug that we need to be competitive in that market? Then we develop a market access strategy in order to try and achieve that. And then again, an organization like ours can show that the capital expenditure for a launch in Europe isn't the same as it is in the US, and the spend can be gated over a period of time. I often point our clients to a really excellent survey that the FPA organization carries out every year, the weight surveys. So FPA is the representative organization for pharma in Europe, or one of them. And, it shows that there is a specific pathway, a specific period of time that generally elapses before, HTA will allow reimbursement. So we show them that, and we sort of say, well, we can gate all of these spends until you actually need to actually invest in infrastructure or people or whatever in each individual country, and we can help you manage that spend. There's the other side of all of this then as well, which looks at early access programs and potentially accelerating a degree of revenue generation in certain countries like France. And again, that to me fits more within the market access strategy, so that we're working with clients actively to try and find the ways that they can get some degree of revenue return as quickly as possible, whilst again, as I said, just being very responsible with their budgetary spend. Then there's other issues around GDPR and whatever, all of which are, very manageable when, in particular, you've got a single organization supporting you on that. We've got a very strong sort of series of supports in terms of that to help organizations navigate their way through it. But in reality, I come back to my first point. It's the perception of complexity that often creates the biggest barrier for a lot of these clients. And again, part and parcel and part of the original vision that our founder, Jim, had when he was putting this together was that he wanted to get to a situation where an organization like ours could help with what he calls global simultaneous launch. He understands it can't be done simultaneously, but what he means is that one provider can help, a smaller company break through, become the next large pharma company by virtue of the fact that they can leverage an existing infrastructure like ours.
True. Okay, so because you spoke about few complexity, and then you also mentioned that Europe is basically, if not more, but at least at par complex with the US market. So I have a very non-technical question, non-pharma related question, but again, it is very pharma related also. So because see, Europe comprises of multiple countries.
Mhm.
Each country has its own rules and regulations and
Mhm.
regulatory body, though everything is governed via EMA. So there is a lot of complexity. And plus then the nature of people. France has different kind of people, whereas Germany is different, Italy is different. So now cutting the story, or I'm actually trying to beat around the bush and exactly ask the question, is that how is this geopolitical scenario? Because there is a lot of turmoil right now going on in Europe. So how geopolitics or politics in terms of impact the landscape, or how do you help your client actually? So my right question would be how Avasana helps its client enter from US into Europe with a lot of complexity in terms of geopolitics. Is there a kind of a SOP in place or a system in place which Avasana has built up to mitigate that kind of complexity?
Well, again, I suppose we're going to respond to the needs of the market or the geopolitical changes as they occur. I assume you're referring to things like tariffs and so on. And
Yeah.
I suppose I got to look at it from a European perspective. I got to look at it positively. Not only are the changes, not only is there stuff going on in Europe, but things going on in the US could mean, for example, that pharma companies need to broaden their revenue pool from which to draw on, in which case Europe suddenly becomes a lot more attractive a place to potentially commercialize in. Because ultimately, again, whilst prices are definitely different in Europe, I think the perception of the difference in prices between the United States and the US isn't always the wide cavernous gap that people seem to think that it is. Um, you know, the other way I look at it as well is, biology doesn't recognize politics, and certainly the biochemistry of a European isn't that much different to the biochemistry of somebody in the US or indeed somebody in India or anybody or anywhere else. And again, as I said earlier, much of the clinical data that's used to generate the data to get these drugs in market and is generated over here in Europe anyway. What I see again from our perspective is, and what we offer clients a de-risked way of commercializing in Europe. The key barrier to many of these clients establishing over here is the need to create a significant infrastructure in order to do so. You've got to have a limited liability company in Germany in order to hire people over there. You have to have something similar in France and so on and so forth. In France, you've got to have a person responsible for product release and so on. So I look at it this way. Having that sort of infrastructure means that companies don't necessarily have to commit that sort of cash outlay just to maintain an organization in those countries, thereby meaning that even if there are significant shifts in political policy that potentially affect their revenue, there isn't a whole bunch of money tied up, as I said, in infrastructure that they can never recover. The last thing I'd say is, I think the pharmaceutical industry gets a hard time at times, but for the most part, it has always been a very global player. It has always, and it has come through, many different political changes in the last 50, 60 years. I look at we mentioned the EMA, just how the European Union pulled together the EMA and has gone from a situation where, for example, each individual country had to provide approval to run a clinical trial. Each individual country had to provide marketing authorization for a product, to a situation now where the European Medicines Agency has a single submission process for trials and a single process for authorization of marketing of products. If you'd have asked me if the European Union could have achieved that 25 years ago, I'd have said no, absolutely not. But it has. And it's certainly making efforts, I think, as well now to look at the HTA situation and its recent sort of rollout of the centralized HTA, the UNETA, is another example of how countries are beginning to realize that to the original motto of the European Union, strength through unity, it applies equally in pharmaceuticals. I suppose I'd make one more point, and I make this in every talk I give. The most important drug that's been developed, I suppose, in the last 20 years was the vaccine for COVID. And the way that the European Union responded to that, together, of course, with the great leadership of the various vaccine companies that developed the vaccines, and Europe buying the product effectively centrally, meant that smaller countries like Malta, like Ireland, where I'm from, were amongst the first and the fastest to have, huge percentages of their population vaccinated. If we were to follow the traditional perception that Germany, is the largest country in Europe and it could have bought the drug ahead of everybody else, they didn't. And I think Europe pulled together, and the European pharmaceutical industry in general pulled together through that entire process. So I think often we overstate the political turmoil, and we can forget the fact that at times of crisis, certainly in Europe, there's been a historic example particularly since World War II, I suppose, where Europe does pull together and does manage to overcome all of these things. So I'm very hopeful, and I think everybody's working very hard to reduce the uncertainty. And at the heart of it all, I think the pharmaceutical industry is doing a phenomenal job in trying to ensure continuity of production, etc. And we want to play our part in that, as I said, by helping smaller companies, mid-sized companies that maybe haven't established over here, to give them the opportunity to get their product to market as well.
Awesome. So I know that we are a bit on the time.
That's
I
okay.
have one last question. I just have one last question. So I was when I was researching about you, I realized that you were at Bio recently, and you spoke about omni-channel
Yeah,
there, and
yeah,
and omni-channel has now become a word of the town, a buzz of the town, basically. Everyone is talking about omni-channel. So what is this space? What is omni-channel? And how that fits into Europe specifically.
yeah.
So
Well, for me, omni-channel is a recognition that the customer base has different ways that it wants to have products detailed to them. I think it's ultimately it's that, right? So
yeah,
the idea that a doctor, for the most part, who are the sort of the beneficiaries of omni-channel, that they can be informed about the benefits of a product in numerous different ways, whether it's an MSL calling them, whether it's a salesperson calling them, whether it's them being able to get a high level of product education through digital media and so on and so forth, and being able to. It's not only a case of delivering it, but also then understanding how they've reacted to that information, measuring it, and making sure that we're cognizant of what's working for them and what isn't working for them. Okay. So to me, that's what omni-channel is. It's that ability to deliver information in a much better way and to learn from the end user how that information has been received, and alter it then to make sure that it's better for future needs. How does it fit into a company like ours? I would say we're purpose built for omni-channel. Again, I mentioned that sort of fusion of technology and the services, that sandwich of our services earlier. And that really, one of the nadirs of that is omni-channel itself. You know, having a sales force that is cognizant of the fact that information could be provided in numerous different ways, having a sales force that understands that a HCP has already received and ingested a piece of information. So representing that doesn't particularly make the experience of the interaction with the information about that product any better for the HCP. So you offer them something else if necessary, or you offer them a different view. That's why we were built. That's to be able to harness all of those things, to be able to bring together the often disparate kind of disciplines required to deliver a solution like omnichannel. You can't just deliver omnichannel as an ad agency, because you've got a sales team that's out there, a commercial team that's out there in the field, that have to understand what their role in the delivery of the information to the HCP is. So again, with us, inherently, it's built into how we manage, how we hire, how we build, how we develop sales team, how we manage them on an ongoing basis, even how we incentivize them on an ongoing basis in support of our clients. So for me, it's right at the heart of our offering, along with things like direct to patient in the United States and so on. So Matt would probably, our marketing team would probably cringe by me saying it, but I think we were built for omnichannel. I think it really is the part of the essence of what we do, combining all of these disparate services into a new and better way of delivering experiences for the HCPs.
awesome. So that was my last question. Thank you, Mike, for your time. So thank you everyone for listening to this. This was Mike Ryan, Executive VP at Eversana, who took out time from his busy schedule to talk to us, give us all a glimpse into the conversation he's going to have at Reuters Pharma 2025 in Barcelona. I will be there to attend the live session. If you are attending the event, please do visit and attend the session, ask questions, a lot of questions, so that we all gain a little bit of more knowledge. Thank you so much.
Great. Now you can cut, Matt.
Yeah.